And leave on time. And I thank all the members of the MTC for being here today. Why don't we do introductions real fast, starting at the far end of the table, and we'll go around like this.
Victoria Johnson, interim Chief Operating Officer for CATS.
Elizabeth Pursuti, Chief Administrative Officer for CATS.
Becky Hawk, Town Manager, Town of Matthews.
Brian Spitzer, Town Manager, Town of Pineville.
Christy Clark, Mayor of Huntersville.
Brad Simmons, Mayor of Mint Hill.
David Phillips, Mayor of Pineville.
Vi Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte.
Renee Garner, Commissioner, Town of Matthews.
Lee Altman, Mecklenburg County Commissioner.
Brent Cagle, Interim CEO.
Rusty Knox, Mayor Davidson.
Woody Washam, Mayor Cornelius.
Tony Lathrop, NCDOT Division 10 and Finance Chair.
Kelly Goforth, Chief Development Officer.
Jason Lawrence, Chief Planning Officer.
Chad Howell, Chief Financial Officer.
All right, very good. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to see you this afternoon. Thank you for spending a little extra time with us this afternoon. So this is our first ever budget workshop. We hopefully it is informative, meets your expectations. At any point during these presentations, please feel free to ask any questions. Anything we can't answer, we will. Anything we can't, we'll pull together a list of questions and provide written responses back to the MTC. We have a couple presentations today. Mr. Howell's going to lead us off and provide you with an overview, some updates on our operating budget. I'll also note that, sort of the order of things. This month we're doing operating budget. Next month we will do capital budget, same basic format, leading us towards ultimately, knock on wood, recommendation of or approval from the MTC to move our budget forward to City Council before July 1st, before the start of our fiscal year. So Chad's going to provide us that update, and then we have a second presentation. The second presentation is a brief overview of the MTC, of an MTC policy. It's MTC 5, which is the travel markets policy. Included in that presentation is, there's not a name for it, so I'm going to dub it the revenue cost analysis that is required in the interlocal agreement. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in with Mr. Howell to move us through the budget presentation.
I'll get started. I think everyone's got books in front of them. Then we'll catch up with the slides when Mr. Ford gets assigned in here. Good afternoon, Commissioner Altman and Commission members. My name is Chad Howell, the CAT CFO. As Mr. Cagle pointed out there, this meeting today is a direct result of a request that came to us from the MTC early on, which was, I'll summarize as saying they wanted to be more involved with the budget process. There was some talk of in the past, folks had felt like they were handed something that they hadn't maybe fully had a chance to review or had a chance to go through in depth. And we're asked to act on it. And so we said, well, we can do something about that. We can have some workshops. And we can go into detail and then also ask the MTC for feedback on what we present. And so today is the first of two of those presentations. Today is we'll talk about our operating revenues and then our operating budget and debt service budgets.
Okay, I'm mute.
Going to the agenda this afternoon, I'll briefly highlight some of our recent accomplishments, kind of recap the overall budget process, and provide a detailed review of CAT's preliminary operating and debt service budgets. However, before I proceed, I would like to introduce Ms. Phyllis Heath. She's the CAT's budget manager, and I'd like for her to introduce the CAT's budget team, without whose hard work we could not be here today.
Good evening. My name is Phyllis Heath, and I serve in the capacity as the Senior Transit Budget Manager. And along with me to complete the team, in addition to our esteemed CFO, Mr. Howell, I have Crystal Gibbons here. She's the capital and grants, capital improvement plan projects as well as grants manager. I also have Mr. Marcus White. He serves as a budget and operations manager. And then I have 4 senior analysts. Mr. Emmanuel Patton. Also have Ms. Erica Uguez. Also Ms. Alden Flores. And our last senior analyst, Ms. Teresa Farley. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heath.
Hey, Chad, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to also thank the budget team. This is sort of their busy time of year, right? Everybody's working on budgets, and certainly they're working really hard, and we appreciate all of the efforts that they've put into this budget process.
Thank you, Mr. Cagle. I'd also like to just briefly thank all the other staff that have supported us in putting this budget together. This is a whole agency work that we do, whole agency plan that we do. And several of the folks are sitting at this table, but others are not here today. But without all of CAT's divisions contributing to this, we could not come and effectively present a budget to you today.
Before you kick off, Ernest,
Yes, ma'am.
and remiss not to recognize the people who are with us virtually. I think there's
Members of the MTC, or I don't know if we can pull them up again, but I did want to give an opportunity to acknowledge them.
Hollis, let's see. There we go.
So if y'all just want to come off of mute, if you want to introduce yourselves, you're very welcome to. Okay, well, Bill, Anthony, and Jamie, welcome. Thank you. You can go ahead.
I'm going to start by just addressing some of our brief accomplishments. This is through FY 2024. Safety and security, as we've talked about to this group before, we have a new security contract in place, a more expansive security contract. That came into being as part of our FY 24 budget. So we talked about that with this group last year, and thanks to your support, we've got that in place and it is ongoing. Our ambassador program, which we have with that exists within safety and security now. It's a program where we'll provide options for riders to, other than having to go and talk with the driver. These are folks that will be on buses and ultimately on rail to support that. Asset preservation and facilities maintenance. We hired a facilities manager, Mr. Fox. He joined us from the city's general services department. And then we've extensively over the past year have worked to improve our facilities. We've talked about our parking decks, our rights of way, and a lot of the other facilities that we have. All were in need of repair and upfitting. We've also done extensive work on the LRVs. Particularly, we have a contract in place with Siemens for around $58 million. That's over multi-years, and that is to basically catch us up with preventive maintenance on our LRV fleet, and that is underway now. We anticipate spending, and you'll see this later on as part of the numbers, we anticipate spending somewhere around $24 million this year of that $58 million to get the cars, again, back up to the current level of maintenance. Valuing employees, we've had field staff pay increases this year and implemented several communications tools. I know senior leadership meets with staff on their anniversary month day. They get an invitation to come meet with all of the senior leadership team and share with us anything that they want to talk about. I always enjoy going to those meetings. I know everyone else does too. We get a lot of information directly from our team members. We completed our annual rail shutdown with no findings from NCDOT SSO. Ms. Johnson, our interim COO, led that along with our rail team. We were awarded a $30 million zero emissions grant. This is a low-no grant. This was for buses and this is for low emissions and battery electric buses and supporting infrastructure. We've hired some key executives and implemented a new organization chart. Talk about that in a minute. increased recruitment and retention efforts. In fact, and we'll talk about this later on, I might be a little off in the numbers, but we're down to around less than 70 vacancies right now, which is around 10% or so, maybe a little bit less than that. Our HR staff has done an absolutely great job of filling the vacancies that we've had over the past year. We're currently finalizing 2 FTA reviews. These were requests that were to the FTA from the city to come in and look at 2 specific parts of CATS, our finances and our maintenance. Right now, we're finalizing those. They've not reported any findings at this point, but we have not closed those out. Once we do, we'll come back and present detail to the commission. We are getting ready to initiate 2 peer reviews through APTA, and these peer reviews, 3 peer reviews, and these will be safety and security, paratransit, and rail operations. APTA is a professional association that we're a member of, and so we'll have other experts come in and look at those operations for us. Here's our org chart. This is not recent. We've been operating under this now for about a year or so, and this is where each of the senior executives has a portfolio assigned under them.
It's okay, I can read that. Sorry.
We have a total FTEs of about approximately 1,400 people, and that's both city employees and Transit Management Charlotte employees. I think everyone has seen this before. These are our mission, vision, and new mission, vision, and value statements, as well as our 25 strategic priorities. And the preliminary operating budget that you'll see aligns with each of these, you'll see that as we go forward. Just to recap our 25 budget process, which is a little different this year than normal, and this workshop is an example of that. So in January, we presented a very high-level preliminary budget, and now we're coming back and presenting more of the details to the commission for review this month and next month as well. Of course, then you'll see us again. We'll come back for adoption in April. Again, the purpose of these workshops is to provide the MTC with a thorough review of CAT's operating and capital budget and to ensure the budgets align with the Commission's priorities. As a reminder, here's the proposed process that we talked about. That's what we've got here. Today is our first budget work session, and then later in the presentation I will discuss the proposed budget calendar going forward. Before I jump into 25, I wanted to just update everyone on where we are, where we anticipate being as part of our FY24 budget. Here's a summary of our projected operating revenues. Our projection right now is approximately $275.5 million. Sales tax are projected to slightly increase over what we had in 23, and will be more than we anticipated when we budgeted for this year. With our grants, which amount to about $43 million, we're working to align new and realign older grants to our current needs. We had a trip to FTA. We took a trip to FTA last week, in fact, to talk to them in person about some of that realignment. And the budget team here that you met are the ones that are actually working to seek out and realign those grants. Passenger fares, ridership continues to improve. However, it's not quite at the rate that we originally projected. So you'll see that we're showing a little bit of under collection there so far in 24. These are projected operating expenditures. As I say, the other side of the coin. So you've seen our revenues. Here's our expenditures for this year. Again, structurally balanced. Projection $275.5 million. Personal services, the projected increase in personal services is directly related to the efforts leadership have made to stabilize the organization and to recruit and retain a highly skilled and dedicated workforce. On operating, we are exceeding where we thought we would be both in maintenance and security and fuel, but those are not overruns. We are addressing items that have been identified that we needed to tackle this year, and so that is driving our operating expenses a little higher than we thought. Moving to 25.
pause for a minute and see if there are
Yes,
any
ma'am.
questions so far?
Yes, ma'am.
Is anybody? Yes, Mr. Lathrop?
What's the size of the reserve?
The reserve as of today is about 250-ish million across all funds.
And that carries over from fiscal year to fiscal year?
It does. That's what's left over. That's what's left at the end. That's as of the end of FY '23, so yes.
Yeah, one thing I'll point out, and this may be coming up later in the slides. So the operating reserves are the cash on hand. It is dedicated to CATS. It rolls over perpetually. About $130 million, not about, exactly $130 million of it is required. And there's two different requirements, but they're both related to financial health of the organization, credit ratings, and the outstanding debt that we have, that CATS has.
Mayor Knox?
Quick question on the operating, on the organizational chart, there's 5 vacancies on there. Are we working to fill those, or?
Yes.
It's not a big team, that's why I'm saying, so.
Well, yeah, and so the other thing to remember is this would be sort of the top-level managers. This does not project the field supervisors and the field staff. There are some vacancies on there, and yes, we're working to fill vacancies. As we have been going through our budget, we're looking at all of our most important needs as far as the vacancies go, so that we've slowed down a little bit on hiring on these types of positions so that we can understand which order we need to fill them in the future, but clearly they will be looking to fill those positions.
Anybody else? I have a few, but make sure. Anybody else? So, frankly struggling to read this slide because I did not bring my readers. So where are the vacancies? Because I cannot see that on my copy.
So working our way from left to right, there is a vacancy in 1, 2, 3, fourth column down in orange, business partnerships, fair programs,
I see.
transit.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I missed one. Contract management in the green under Chad's group. Then moving over to the business partnerships. Then you have a vacancy in.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate your willingness, but now that I see it, I don't want you to have to detail all of it.
Okay.
Thank you. That does answer that question I had. Additionally, when you say reserve, in the county, I'm wondering, is that what we call fund balance, or is that different?
Yes, it is the same.
Okay.
So fund balance, operating reserve, cash on hand.
Okay. And so the $130 million that's required, the difference between the $250 million and $130 million is what, if there was one-time expense, might be amenable to be spent out of that fund. Is that correct, or?
Yes, so for example, Mr. Howell mentioned that we were catching up, so to speak, on bus replacements, on some major heavy maintenance in the rail fleet, that those excess reserves, if you will, enable us to be able to fund those needed expenditures.
Okay. And regarding the operating revenues, that slide, where we were talking about passenger fares, I know that you and I had discussed getting an update on fare evasion. And if you wouldn't mind sort of briefing everybody with that conversation and the information you're going to be able to bring forward.
Yeah, so when we think about fare evasion, where that is most relevant to think about it is on the rail. We have what's called an open system. And what that really means is you don't pay your fare and then go through a turnstile, right? It's the honor system. You buy a ticket, you get on, and we have what's called fare inspectors who come through the train periodically. Not every train everyday type of thing, but they ask passengers to present proof of fare. Now, in that system, there will be some fare evasion, right? People who get on and ride but haven't paid their fare. So there is debate in the industry. Other cities are looking, and it's very common for light rail systems to be what's called an open system. Subway systems are almost always closed systems. Light rail systems are more predominantly open systems, but because of the fare evasion that can occur, there are cities that are looking at, could they close their light rail system? So Commissioner Altman and I had this conversation. It's not something that Charlotte has studied. Clearly, there are challenges in any system that has a light rail system to creating a closed system. Some of the challenge is financial because of the cost of the equipment. Other challenges really are around how do you close some of our platforms, right? Because the narrow nature of the platforms or the nature of the platforms where they're up against the rail trail, other things, it may be very, very difficult to do that. The other issue with an open system, because it's at grade, you may, by closing the system, create a safety concern, I suppose a security concern, but more importantly, a safety concern where someone may try to evade fares by accessing the platform through the right-of-way, through the rail right-of-way. So there are pros and cons to it. What we do know is as we were transitioning the security contractor, the security contractor is who performs fare inspections for us. So as we were transitioning from one security contractor to two security contractors, we know that there were some lapses. Fare inspections became even fewer or less often just because of that transition and lack of staff or transitioning from one to the other. So as we think about what we can do, one thing that we are looking at as we work with our security contractor is launching a marketing campaign first, right? Informing customers that light rail isn't free. And second, really doing a fare inspection blitz where you tell people ahead of time, and then you really send out the fare inspection forces over a period of a week or 2 weeks to really conduct extensive and numerous fare inspections to help to increase awareness and gain better compliance.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, I think that we probably don't have a sense of how much revenue we're losing. Just anecdotally, I've heard people say that like no one pays, just it's very, I wonder if it's even 1 and 2 who's paying. I mean, but I have no way to really know. So obviously it's not fair to the taxpayer. It's not fair to bus riders who have to pay to gain entrance to the bus. So I would like for us to understand what we're even losing while we assess what it would take to fix it and that kind of thing. So thank you for bringing that forward when you're able. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for raising this as an issue. One of my favorite stories is about a friend of mine who lives in Indian Land who comes down for all of the entertainment, and she was like thanking me for the train ride. And I was like, what? And she did not know. So I like the idea of the publicity and marketing around this is something that you're doing, and it's about our community need and what you're doing, and in a way like that. And then if we're going to do the evaluation of what we're losing, I would really like to see us have a really detailed how much does the study cost, and maybe some comparison to other places as you go through this process, because you want to make sure it adds value. And I think the marketing campaign may have as much to do, because she told me it was on the senior center board that they could take the train. So maybe we ought to be looking at where these opportunities exist as well, where people are advertising for us and not having it done in a way that provides passenger fares.
So we do think So there's two things that happen. One is just a lack of understanding. I'll give a personal example. My wife came home the other day from seeing her doctor. She said her doctor was talking about the Love and Life Festival that's coming up. And he said, you should go. It looks like it's going to be fun. And you can park at the light rail and ride in because it's free. And my wife said, no, my husband will tell you it's not free. But it's very, very value oriented and you should go ahead and pay. So there is some misperception about that. I will also say what we do see is there are passengers who understand the rules. And what they'll do is go into the app, they'll pay for the pass, but they won't activate it. And then when they see the fare inspector come, they activate it. And so we do know that by having fare inspectors visible, even if they don't stop you, once a certain amount of passengers, when they see the fare inspector come on, you see a lot of people get their phone out. What they're doing is activating the pass that they had purchased and we're just holding to activate. And so I think that we can definitely try to better understand the magnitude of the fare loss for sure. And we can look at what other open systems in the industry would view as sort of averages. But we also know that a visible presence of CATS uniformed personnel creates, there's a cause and effect relationship when those folks get on trains, because they'll even report, they'll say, yeah, I step on a train and everybody pulls out their phone and starts activating their pass. And I get it, but that's why that visible presence is so important.
Thank you. And then on this slide, so do I understand, for example, that you budgeted, $155 million in sales tax, but, wait, I'm sorry. Can we go to the next one, projected expenditures? That's what I wanted to ask about. So could you go one more slide to the operating expenditures slide?
There we go.
There you go.
Yes, ma'am.
So if I understand, this is saying, for example, you thought personnel services would be 113 million, but it turned out to be 128 million. Is that correct? So do we have like a $22 million shortfall with our expenditures?
No.
I mean, a gap?
You are reading that correctly, yes. We budgeted for 113 million. It looks like it's going to come in at 128. There is not a shortfall. We have covered that with this series of revenues. We will do a net draw. We talked about our fund balance. We will have a net draw of approximately $7 million we're estimating from our overall reserves to cover that. But some of the other revenues are making up part of the other difference.
Okay. Is it typical in a year that our expenditures would be 22 million more than we had budgeted? That seems like a big gap.
I can't speak specifically on CATS, as this is really my first year here. I would say it is not unusual when you have an organization that's had to undergo the amount of change that we have in a year. We've undertaken a lot of stabilization efforts this past year, and a lot of those are what is driving both the personal services and the operating expenses here to be higher. From a staffing standpoint, and I'll touch on this later, but now's a good time. You raised a very good question. From a staffing standpoint, we had to take some actions that both to recruit and retain the workforce that we had. TMOC, which are of course, that's where our bus operators are. Right after we got here, they underwent a negotiation, of a finished negotiation with the union employees, not city staff, but with the union employees. That resulted in an overall increase for that group as well. So the numbers that you see here when you see personal services also includes all of the bus operators that are part of TMOC as well. And so part of those increases are in there. We had to selectively do some pay increases for primarily on our operational side, but not exclusively on our operation side, in some of our specialized job classes. not only to retain the folks that we had, but to recruit and fill those positions. The reason we've gone from approximately 100 and, I want to say 100 and, well over 100, about 150-ish positions to about the 60 to 70 that we have now is because we've done a lot, made a lot of efforts to fill those positions and to be able to attract folks to fill them. So filling those vacancies is also part of this too, because we're more staffed now than we have been in a number of years. The 113, when we built that, because that was part of the budget that I put together last year, we did include a vacancy rate in there, and we've now had to eclipse that because we needed to. And so the 113 had a vacancy rate built in that we've gone past that now because we needed to strengthen the organization.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, I have
Yes,
one.
Mayor Washam.
Back to the fund balance, if you will. Are there certain parts of that 250 million that are pre-allocated or pre-designated to things that have to be spent that way, that are pre-directed, or do we have really access to all that money?
The 130 million is, those are reserves designated for specific purposes.
Okay, the 130 is.
Yeah, the 130. And then the remainder is, in effect, open fund balance to be utilized for needed expense.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, transitioning into FY25. We actually talk about the fund balance here in just a second. We'll actually talk about that. Our sales tax outlook for FY25, we're projecting a 3% increase. We've worked with the city strategy and budget and the city's economists to estimate that. You'll see shortly that we're projecting that to go up to.
Hey, Chad, hold on just a second. Sure. The other thing to note about that, so we work directly with the city's economist, but right now 3% is where, based on the last 9 months worth of receipts have been, so that's where they're at. As we get closer and closer over the next 3 months, that number may change. So just be aware the revenue number could change, probably not a lot, but will change a little bit as each new month of data comes in. We will update that number accordingly.
Yeah, in fact, historically, we've seen that number be a little more than 3%, but we felt comfortable with that for now. Passenger fares, right now, we're projecting those to be roughly flat. And that's also because of the ridership data that we're seeing and the level of service that we're providing, but also because we're not recommending any fare increase this year. In fact, looking back, it looks like we haven't had a fare increase in about 8 years. And so we're not recommending one for next year either. And that's a fare increase in any of our modes of transit. Grants, again, continuing the effort to realign older grants to our new priorities. We're also continually seeking new grant opportunities. We talked about earlier on the competitive grant that we got last year, the Low-No grant. We're going to look at another one of those this year, and are continuously looking at other grants that may be available to help us both on the operating and the capital side. Our financial safeguards, of course, we have a fund balance of approximately $250 million. Here's the 100 and the 30 are referenced how they are. The 100 million is really more on the operating side. It's a series of funds. We have to be greater than or equal to $100 million when the year closes. The revenue reserve has to be equal to 30 million. So we are in excess of both of those. This year, you will see within the operating budget a net draw from the reserve of approximately $5 million. Again, Commissioner Altman, your question kind of led into this very well. A lot of the things that you saw that drove those numbers up in 24 are also going to continue driving into 25. Again, stabilizing, right-sizing the organization, making much-needed improvements across in a number of areas. So we do need to tap into the fund balance again to do that, although it's not by a lot. We'll also be utilizing some savings that's out there on our debt service side. So occasionally, we will contribute to our debt service fund over a period of time. The payments, what we contribute and what we pay out don't always align based on the good work the city finance does. So we had some savings over there. We're gonna utilize that this year as well. And then, of course, meeting our financial performance objectives. And here is kind of graphically what I just spoke about. So we're total estimated revenues is $280 million, which is approximately a 2% increase over where we think we're going to end up in 2024. So the 3% increase in sales tax proceeds totals about $164 million, about $6 million increase over potentially where we think we may end up with 20 and 24. The breakdown of our revenues is 58% sales tax, 11% state and federal grants. 15% state and federal grants, 11% maintenance of way contribution from the city of Charlotte, and 6% of our revenues are derived from passenger fares. Here's just a breakdown of our half-cent sales tax over the last few years. Again, we're budgeting we're projected to bring in about $164 million. We will budget as part of our operating budget $153 million of that, with the $10 million difference going to reserves, and that is in keeping with the philosophy that we have about the trend line, which is designed to ensure that it's there in case there were to be a sudden either a sharp or a persistent dip in our sales tax revenues. And so we don't budget as part of our operating budget all of the sales tax revenues that we anticipate bringing in, really, and builds our reserve or rainy day fund. I just thought I'd walk through a few. Here's the next few slides are going to be just drilling in a little deeper on some of our larger revenue items. When you look at the 25 money here, COVID grant funds are still about $10 million of that. Formula grant funds, so formula grants are grants that we receive on an annual basis. The amount may change, but these are monies that come to CATS on an annual basis from the federal government. Not automatically, we do have to apply for them, but they are there for us to apply for. That's about $20 million. And then we're estimating to bring in about $9 million in state maintenance from the state maintenance assistance program. So that's state money, total of about $44 million. This is our maintenance of effort. So you heard me talk about that earlier. These are funds that come in from three entities: the City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and the Town of Huntersville. And this ties back to, and we'll touch on this again later, the general statute that gave us the ability to, or how we collect our taxes. It also talks about that you can't supplement, that the proceeds can supplement but not supplant existing funding. And so these were the entities that had transit prior to 1998, and they have continued to contribute to CATS since that time. And so that's what makes up maintenance of effort. You'll hear me say that. You'll sometimes see it in our documents as transfer from general fund.
Yeah, so just, and this will come up as we go into the second presentation as well. MOE, or maintenance of effort, again, it's that state statute that says, the part of the state statute that says supplement, not supplant. Clearly, Charlotte makes up the largest portion of that MOE because they had the largest transit. They were providing the most transit in 1998 when this was created. But in addition to that, Charlotte has increased their MOE contribution consistent with inflation. That's not required, but it has been done by Charlotte. And so that's why you'll never see the orange bar, which is a combination of Mecklenburg and Huntersville. That .212 does not change, right? We could project that out for the next 25 years and it's .212. Charlotte's grows because they have, and we appreciate this, they have indexed it to inflation at a roughly 3% growth rate year over year. So that is one reason why it changes. It would not change, it will not or has not changed for the other MOE contributing organizations, if that makes sense. I hope that made sense.
I thought it'd be, before we talk about fares, is to just talk briefly about our ridership trends. Of course, ridership has increased by about 50% since return to work, and more than doubled on the rail. However, it's still not back to pre-pandemic. In fact, we're only 34%, total ridership is 34% below the pre-pandemic. And so again, if you think back to revenues, and you see this to our fare revenues, they were down from where we expected them to be, and so this is contributing, to that. And what this chart shows is, if you look at, really, this is the average. So the numbers at the top are the average of the bar graphs below them, right? So 18, 19, 20, really pre-pandemic, we had about an average of about 24 million in fare revenue. Think about during pandemic, 21 through 23, it fell to 12 and a half. We're starting to come back out of that. So again, this kind of financially supports what you saw here, right? We're coming back out of it. So fare revenue is starting to increase. And again, we're projecting a slight increase into 25 to around 18 million. But you can still see the average of those 2 years is 16.3, which is still well below the 24 that we were on average pre-pandemic.
Do you want to pause there at the end of the section?
Sure. We can pause there. Are there any questions? All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
Switching sides. This is now going to be we're talking about the budget side, the expense side of the operating budget. We just finished up with the revenue side. We touched on this earlier. Our budget this year focused heavily not only on mission and vision and value statements, but also on our strategic priorities, which are organizational resilience, employee success. Think of that as recruit and what it takes to recruit and retain employees, future forward planning and innovation, exceptional customer service, and positive community impact. Related to these, we have some key drivers and initiatives. Of course, first and foremost, we want to meet all of the relevant MTC financial policies. Our budget is structurally balanced. In other words, we have enough revenues to cover the expenses. Financially, it is financially constrained in that we had a lot of requests that did not make it this far. They did not make it through the departmental vetting process when you put it into the context of what we had, and so it is financially constrained. It does limit our ability to increase service levels beyond what is provided today. This would be in our modes of transportation, our modes of transit. And key position enhancement requests were approved, but a number of enhancements, in fact, the majority of enhancements were not approved this year because we needed to focus the money on other things. Some key initiatives that are already underway or will soon be underway. Continuing investment in employees. We're getting ready to start a classification and compensation study. Again, going back to what we talked about a few slides back when we're looking at 24, coming into the organization, needing to make sure that we can recruit and retain a workforce that can give us a world-class transit agency. So we're looking at other ways to do that with the class and comp study. Also, in professional development, training of our staff. We have an emphasis on state of good repair. That's another way to look at that is we have an emphasis on maintaining the assets that we have. Comprehensive operational analysis, in other words, ensuring what we're doing is that we're doing it in the best way possible. Fair policy redesign, we've touched on that before. That's going to get underway shortly. System branding review, so look at not changing cats from cats, but looking at some of the parts of the brand that we have and looking at the ways that make it more in line with where we think it should go. Continued investment in safety and security. Mr. Cagle touched on that earlier. Some of the contracts that we've put in place, improving our safety security contractors. Microtransit and targeted reliability improvements, and facility master planning and meeting office space needs for the agency.
Chet, can you hold for a second?
Yes, I can.
So a couple things on the key initiatives. As Mr. Howell stated, we made compensation adjustments with our operators, with our rail staff, with our field staff. So rail car maintenance, rail operators, the ROC, Rail Operations Control Center. As well, the bus side renegotiated their collective bargaining agreement last year. That led to higher salaries, right, more competitive pay. And that has really been what, a year ago when we talked about staffing, we were talking about vacancies. So the result of that competitive pay has been a significant reduction in vacancies. Mr. Howell mentioned that we were at around 10% vacancies right now. A year ago, it was about double that. And then when you drill down in certain work groups, it was even higher for specific work groups. So then I guess the question, I want to explain a little bit the classification and compensation study. So we do feel like we're very competitive on the compensation side. The study will help us affirm that, and if there are areas where we still need to be more competitive, it will give us a roadmap for how we get there. But the other side, as we have had conversations with NCDOT, SSO, they do have or have had concerns that we need to take a look at the job classifications that we have to ensure that the job descriptions and classifications line up with the duties, and that we have the appropriate job classifications needed to support our operation. And so that is a primary focus of the class and comp study. And then when you think about the comprehensive operational analysis and the fair policy redesign, those do go hand in hand. What that really means is, starting from the fair policy, it's looking at the policy around our fares. It's looking at the structure. We have a lot of fares. We have a lot of fares for different products. Different products are priced differently. And even within the same modes, we have a lot of different tickets. You can get a one ride, you can get a daily pass, you have just a lot of different fares out there, and it's confusing. So what we are doing, as well as other transit agencies, is looking at how we simplify the fare structure and better address equity concerns or needs inside of that fare structure. By having a better designed fare structure, we also think that by creating better equity, there also is the potential to increase fare revenues as well. So all of those things will be looked at. The comprehensive operational analysis really looks at how we operate. It looks at things like the run time for our bus local routes. An example, we have a couple local routes that are, quite frankly, so long. Their on-time performance is routinely low. That is not because the operator is doing something wrong. It's because the route is just, quite frankly, too long. We haven't done a running time analysis across our system in many years. It is something that we should have been doing frequently, probably every 5 or so years. We're not sure when we did the last one, but it's been more than 5 years ago. So by doing those kinds of things, we can create better efficiency and better customer outcomes. Because we know when we look at missed trips, that affects reliability. But for a customer, when you think about the difference between missed trips and on time, a late bus, it all sort of equates to the same thing. The bus wasn't there when you said it was going to be, and when I needed it to be. So that's really what we're talking about on the comprehensive operational analysis. Those do all start to come together. I'll even say the system branding looks the same. It's creating commitments to our customers, and how do we refresh the brand? Not go away from cats, but how do we refresh the brand and create marketing around the other things that we're doing and create commitments to the customers?
Are we at a breaking point? Are we at a...
Sure, absolutely.
So any questions about where we are right now? Anybody?
Yes, ma'am. I really appreciate this list of key initiatives and the clarity that it provides for all of us to have this. So, one, I'd like to kind of get an idea of around, Mr. Cagle, when you talked about the classification and compensation study. As we're doing this, all of this work, does it meet the Federal Transit Administration requirements that would keep us at a level of support or excellence for what we are doing as CATS? Are these requirements or things that would help us be a part of what I would say a highly performing system?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It's not that we're out of compliance by any means. It's that to meet sort of best practice, these things come into play, right? To be a higher performing organization. It's not that we're out of compliance, but to perform better and be, best practice, meet a higher standard, these things come into play.
And I have one more question. Many of us have been talking about Connect Beyond, and I think several of us serve on that. And one of the things that they have talked about is fares that could be treated across the footprint with other regional transit systems. And I guess what I want to say, I would love to see what fare design looks like in this computer age and what we're doing. And I think with something that I would just suggest that if we're doing this, perhaps we share along with some of the other efforts that we're talking about there, where their consolidation would help bring a certain amount of collaboration to the system.
Yeah, we agree with that, and I didn't say that, but so the fare policy will look at how fares integrate across different systems, neighboring systems, but also Jason's team is looking at how we can work together to do things like you may buy a fare, if you will, in Cabarrus County, and that ticket is valid when you transfer onto a CATS system, and how we work together to make that more seamless for the customer. So it's not you buy one ticket, get off a bus, now you got to buy another ticket on a different system. We're looking at all of those kinds of things. It's not so much about how everybody in the region, right, has one fare or one fare structure, but it's how do those fare structures work together and then create better customer experience for the passenger, for the customer.
That's great to hear. As I said, this list is absolutely something that I think will help us over the longer term. So thank you.
I had one question, and it deals, during the presentation today, I've heard the term retention several times with the employees. If I remember right, last month, one of the presentations we had, it was mentioned that they were over-hiring right now to have people available because of that. Is that something that's already been implemented, or is that something that you look to do in 2024?
No, so what we have been doing in certain work groups where vacancies were very high is we looked at quote-unquote overhires, and those are being eliminated out of the system by being consolidated as full-time equivalent, right? An FTE, an FTE. The other thing that was going on over the last year is where we had high vacancies, we had, and we still do today, but we're moving away from this. We had what was called mandatory overtime. And I'll note, it's not uncommon for our employees to work overtime, right? Something happens, one operator doesn't show up for a shift and the prior operator has to stay a little bit over while a substitute operator comes in. That's normal overtime, and that happens. Mandatory overtime for us was to meet some of the maintenance needs that we had to take certain work groups and say, you will be required to work your normal 40 hours in a week plus some amount of additional time. And it wasn't, it was a mandatory schedule that exceeded 40 hours a week. Now, it did not exceed the hours of service maximums that we have, but it was more than 40 hours. And so we were using mandatory overtime because of that. The two work groups that affected was rail car maintenance and the ROC, the Rail Operations Control Center. They are continuing to do that today, but their staffing is significantly better today. I think the ROC has 4 vacancies today, whereas in the past, it had about a 50% vacancy rate, so close to 8 vacancies. And they have 3 controllers in the pipeline to come out. RCM is the same way. They have a good amount of new maintenance techs coming through the pipeline. So we will be able, luckily, to move away from mandatory overtime sometime, we estimate, in the next 6 months, we believe. And it is a catch-22. The employees were great. They stepped up and did what they needed to do, but we also know that it's hard. It's wear and tear. It wears them out. And so we appreciate their efforts, but we do think it's important to move away from that situation.
Commissioner Gardner.
I have a quick question about microtransit. In Matthews and probably a lot of the other suburbs, we see that as a big connector to getting to transit. So I'm a little bit curious about what that means as an initiative.
Yeah, so microtransit, right now, we are in the process of issuing the RFP and getting proposals back for microtransit. That RFP assumes that we will use the model, the microtransit model of a dedicated contractor to provide the service. Once the RFP is out and the proposals come back, we'll have a better idea of cost of the service. And that will give us the abilities to start having conversations with the MTC about rolling out the service. The service is scheduled to roll out in the northern part of the county in Davidson, Cornelius, and Huntersville first. And then as we understand how it works, we get better at it. And we work with the contractor, we would look to expand it across the entire service area of the county. When we envision microtransit full implementation, all areas of the county will have microtransit. I believe there are 19 zones, and they're all across the county. But that will take time. I'll also mention this is where we'll have to be talking about the financially constrained model that CATS has, because there may be some ability to roll out microtransit incrementally, but there also we will be looking at microtransit as a way to replace existing service that is less effective than microtransit, right? So it becomes a cost push, if you will. It's taking a less effective mode, replacing it with a more effective. There are some areas where, quite frankly, that is not possible. Those are just additive services, and that's where we will have to always be mindful of the financial constraints that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, we talked about a year ago, we were at 20% vacancies, now we're down to 10% vacancy. What vacancy number did we use in working on this year's budget?
10%.
Okay, so we're actively hiring, but we don't expect it to improve?
Well, so with an organization as large as ours, 70 vacancies is a 10% vacancy rate is a bit normal. It would be surprising to get too much below that. And that's simply because you do have people leaving the organization. You also have, as vacancies are created, hiring in many instances creates another vacancy because you hire someone who promotes. And so one vacancy can turn into a string of vacancies. So we are assuming about a 10% vacancy rate going forward, yes.
And this only concerns rail operators and paratransit, not bus at all, right? Because we don't staff bus at all.
That is correct. On the bus side, what they are staffing to is the operators needed to maintain and provide the service that we provide today, right? And so when we think about the bus service that's provided today, there's a number of operators plus what they call an extra board or additional staff who can sub in for training and those kinds of things. So there is a number that's calculated to provide the service that we provide today, and that's what they staff to, and that's what they budget to.
Is bus at 10% vacancy?
Bus, I'm not sure where they're at. I believe they have the staffing necessary to cover the service today, yes. So the other thing about bus, remember, so bus, on the bus side, they have, because it's a different model, they don't really track vacancies the way we do. What they look at is, do they have the necessary operators to provide the service on a day-to-day basis? And they do. So.
Anybody else? Mayor Clark?
Circling back to the microtransit, I know Huntersville is supposed to be like a beta test for that. Do we have a timeline for like when the RFP would roll out and when it would come to Huntersville?
Yeah, so we're, again, the RFP, once we have proposals, that will we will be better informed about the rollout because we'll know cost. We'll also know from the contracted providers what their ramp-up time are, right? They'll need to hire, they'll need to possibly purchase vehicles, those kinds of things. So as soon as we have the RFP, the proposals back, we'll know more. We would anticipate it to be this year, this calendar year. It could be as early as this summer, but we'll know more as we get proposals back.
When were those due? Do you know?
The RFP, JL, when does the RFP go out?
Yeah, so we haven't finalized it completely internally, but we do anticipate advertising in the coming months. And then as Mr. Cagle stated, we do hope to roll that out this year.
Okay. Mayor Knox.
And one more thing about microtransit. Once the RFPs are done and everything, where is the, I guess, where's the model for accountability with this? Because this is a very interpersonal mode of transportation, much more so than putting dozens of people on a bus or a light rail. So, you know, I worry about the customer service end because it doesn't take much to taint it. Mm-hmm. So where's the oversight? Is that?
It would be via the contract, yes.
Okay.
So the contract will be with CATS, and we will have performance standards and service standards, and we will monitor those.
This will be a private contractor?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. There are several companies that provide these services. Actually, Wilson, North Carolina uses a contractor exclusively for its transit service provision. Much smaller town, but they use they use this model for all of their transit. I think you all may be aware. You've seen in the news, Gaston. Is it Gastonia? Gastonia is looking at doing that, with the exception of the express routes that link Gastonia to Charlotte. So there are some smaller towns that use this exclusively as their transit provider. Now, I will mention, as we're looking at the contracted model, the other way to do this is to self-perform. So CATS hires the people, purchases the vehicles. We are not ruling that out. We want to explore that option, but we're not ready to do that today.
All right, anybody else? Okay, thank you.
We've already touched on a number of these as in our other parts of our conversation today, but I'll cover them just briefly. These are some challenges that we see coming up in FY25 and potentially beyond as we shift into future fiscal years. Maintaining the realities, financial realities of maintaining what we have. You know, this is, again, we touched on this, the costs associated with stabilizing the organization, as in I'm sure anyone in here that's been to a grocery store or any store lately, it costs more now to just do what we used to do a year or more ago. Well, that's true of the organization as well. And so just as there's increased operating costs here, there's still some latency with pandemic effects to the costs and availability of parts and services that are driving costs up. We talked about we have an aging system and technology, so we need to improve our state of good repair. We just have a number of things. If you think back to when the Blue Line came into service, we've been about 15 or 7, I think it's about 17 years. So a lot of the things that in prior years had not reached either the end of their useful life or near the end of their useful life or time for major maintenance are there now. And so that you'll see that in this year's budget and moving forward. Changing ridership patterns, we actually talked about that earlier as well. We're still not up to where we were pre-pandemic. And in fact, if this is Chad's non-scientific way of doing it, Chad, this is from driving in on throughout the week. If it almost looks like a standard distribution of when folks come into the office, right? More people in on Wednesday, less on Monday and Friday. But again, it's not what we were pre-pandemic. Safety and security of our riders and staff remains paramount, so we've taken steps to do that. Also, what we're seeing is just additional regulations and monitoring. We talked about earlier that the state, is looking at some of the things that we do to ensure that we're meeting the appropriate standards. Reliability and frequency of services, the overall perception of the system, and being a part of a growing region that with additional transit needs.
Actually, can we pause there for a second?
Yes.
You'll correct me if I get any of this wrong, and for those who are new, like my recollection is that CATS, before your tenure, got very behind on purchasing new buses, and so it became sort of mission critical to purchase buses at a fairly rapid pace. And, there's a commitment to electric buses. However, your experience preliminarily was that they are a little bit wonkier, maybe slightly less reliable. They have a shorter duration of how far they can drive, and they require a big space with some very expensive, powerful charging mechanisms, or they're not going to be ready to be back in use when you need them to be. And so for that reason, when you needed to make the purchases, you didn't buy only electric. You bought some sort of mix.
Yes.
Is all that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And so, so acknowledging that, some of those challenges, I got this question I don't know how to answer, so this seems like the right moment since we're talking about aging infrastructure and assets. What type of buses are you planning to purchase on your next large purchase, and what are some of your main factors in that? Is it the ones I've already said, or because what I'm hearing is it's now more about cost and less about some of those reasons that I laid out?
Yeah, so it is not about cost. Quite frankly, let me start from the beginning. I jumped to the end. I'm bad about that. When we have 18 buses in the fleet, 20 buses in the fleet that are full electric, battery electric buses. And we have on order approximately 15 additionals. The rest of the orders that we have made have been hybrid electric buses, diesel hybrid electric buses. And we are going to continue ordering diesel electric hybrid buses. We will, on a limited basis, continue to buy battery electrics, but it will really be to test the technology to see how it continues to evolve and develop. The cost differential between a diesel electric hybrid and a battery electric and a full battery electric vehicle is de minimis. Used to be that a diesel bus versus an electric bus, 2 times the cost, and hybrids were about in the middle. Hybrids now, because demand is so high, are basically close to the same cost. I think there's about $100,000 to $200,000 difference, but basically because of the demand on diesel electric hybrids, that price has continued to increase. The advantages or the why. The diesel electric hybrids have a sufficient range, whereas for us, about 30% of our routes, they do not, a battery electric bus cannot serve approximately 30% of our bus routes because they're longer. A day of driving is more than a day of charge. The other issue that we have is really with a region the sizes that we have, even for routes that can be served on a single charge, you have 3 to 6 hours of charge time overnight, and that becomes a bit problematic because our buses, they work hard, and they usually don't get 3 to 6 hours a night off, right? You can't just park them for 3 to 6 hours. You need them before that. So diesel hybrids, they represent a much cleaner bus than what we have, but they also, while they are not zero emission, they do have performance characteristics that exceed the battery electrics. The other thing that I'll say about electrics is just in general the charging infrastructure. The traditional way to charge where you park it and plug them in is very difficult with a commercial operation. And we would really need to rethink and invest in additional facilities to be able to more efficiently and effectively charge an entire fleet. And we're not there yet. And so, and then in addition to that, I would say that the battery electrics that we have been testing in our pilot have performed well. They do seem to have a bit more downtime than a traditional bus. What's not clear to us is that really a reflection of the bus's performance, or is it a reflection of difficulty to get parts when needed for these specialty vehicles? Either way, they do have a bit more downtime than a traditional bus or than a hybrid bus would. So we are looking at that. I mentioned before this meeting started, we're ordering some 5 over-the-road buses. One of those buses we anticipate buying as a full battery electric to test it. The others will be traditional buses. There aren't hybrids in that space, so they will be traditional buses. But we do want to test the battery electric when we can, so that as the technology develops, so we can be better positioned to do that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Renee, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm not usually here at these meetings, so what is an over-the-road? Is that just your
An express route. It's a double axle in the rear, so it's a larger bus, and traditionally we use those for express routes. They're more comfortable, they're configured differently, and they perform better over the road. Like, think about a Greyhound bus or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
So the most concentrated carbon footprint naturally would be within the confines of the city of Charlotte. So I'm assuming that if the test buses that you're using have been specific to city routes only, and is that a model that if we decide to use electric buses in the future, we use them specifically within the confines? I know you say you're looking at one for over the road, but for me, I'm 20 miles away, and if it's an all-day thing, I understand the footprint of the infrastructure, and I don't want charging stations built up and down the interstate because that's a large footprint.
Right.
So
So we're looking at that. Most of our electric buses have been used on the shorter routes, which by the nature of it means they're more central to Charlotte, to our bus yards. We have tried to test them on a variety of routes, but clearly the shorter routes are the desired. The other thing I'll say, this was a perfect question. The other thing I'll say about the hybrids, in areas where there has been a traditional underinvestment or that have high pollution type of areas, the diesel electric hybrids, the new ones, they have the capability to automatically turn off the diesel and run on full electric for short periods, right? And you do that through geofencing. It's not something that the driver has to remember and flips a switch. You set up, through technology, a geofence, and so when the driver crosses into a specific zone, the bus can go full electric, and then once they cross out of the zone, it comes back on with the diesel. And we are going to be experimenting with that quite a bit and utilizing that for the kinds of things you're talking about, where we would want to be more sensitive to air quality and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
It made me think of a question. On the micro transit, I know a lot of the Uber and Lyft, do you have a choice of using an electric car or a gas car? I wondered if there was a thought on the micro transit. Is that a customer choice, or is it a choice that will be made within the agreement?
Yeah, so that would be in the agreement. What I would say is, so a little bit about microtransit. The vehicles will be ADA accessible. It won't be exactly like, a lot of people, me included, talk about microtransit almost like it's exactly like Uber and Lyft. It's a lot like Uber and Lyft, but not exactly.
Right.
These are larger vehicles. You may have some fellow passengers with you. It's not just your exclusive ride. So it is not just a single person.
a microbus.
It's a microbus.
Right.
And so when we think about electric vehicles and the potential there is a lot more potential for smaller electric vehicles in this space. And so we will be exploring that with the proposers as they propose, because we do think there's a lot more potential for use of full electrics in this space.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes,
Madam
sir.
Chair. This is Bill Thunberg. I put a couple of comments in the,
I'm
in the
sorry.
chat. But,
We will monitor that
but
better,
I-
but thank you for piping up, Bill.
Sure, but if I could, just three quick things. First, I've got some credentials regarding decarbonization in terms of air quality, and the physics show that hybrids, just using a Tesla for example, you can make 90 hybrids for using the natural resources that are invested in the battery of one Tesla, and you can get 14 times the improvement in the air quality from those 90 hybrids than the one Tesla. And I'm sure that the same situation is true with the diesel buses, especially if you're using the Tier 5 diesels with regards to the efficiency of the diesel engine itself. We don't need to talk about that, but I just wanted to throw it out there. If you're interested in cleaner air, you're better off going with the hybrids at this point in time, and probably for the next 15 years or so. There were
Mr.
two other
Thunberg,
points.
The other
Yeah.
thing I'll mention, we are also interested in watching the green hydrogen hybrids develop. Right now, that's not feasible for Charlotte because of fueling, but there are also green hydrogen electric hybrids that some transit agencies have used that actually create a lot of those benefits, and green hydrogen is a zero emission fuel as well. So to your point, we do want to look at hybrids, and we're also interested in looking at green hydrogen hybrids as that fuel hopefully becomes more available in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's actually where my expertise lies, is in the area of hydrogen, but decarbonization in general is one of the things that I'm in. So I'm happy to talk to you about that later. But the other two things, I know it's getting late, is with regards to the fare study, why not consider at the same time that you're doing these other things, no or low fare alternatives that overcome some of the issues that you've discussed here already, with regards to, trying to figure out fare loss or what the proper fare should be or whatever. So you're talking about 6% of revenue. So if it's $16 million, if you divide that number by the number of trips that you have, you'll get an average fare amount. So you can say, well, if I reduce that average fare amount by 50%, you can calculate how much your number of fares would have to go up to actually to know what it would be to come out with the $16 billion, or actually improve over the $16 million in revenue, and you would avoid some staffing and some other operational issues that might come up with regards to fare handling and back office kinds of things. So
we agree that will be part of the study. That is part of the study.
Yeah. The last item is with regards to the key initiatives. And essentially, the question that I had is, and I'm not expecting an answer right now. I think this is just something that I'm throwing out there. And I thank you for the time, Madam Chair. How will the board be able to measure the level of achievement toward the key initiatives? And how does that connect to the budget, as the budget is the chief resource for achieving those identified initiatives? So it's an accountability piece.
And are you posing that question with respect to air quality, or?
No, I'm proposing that with regards to the key initiatives that were identified on that slide that we saw. And one of those key initiatives, of course, was
Yeah.
KPIs
No,
and
that's a very good point. Thank you for making it, and Mr. Cagle will be following up in writing on that.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you for raising it. All right. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've covered a lot of this already in detail, so I'm just going to briefly touch on a couple of things. So our budget for, if you put what we've already talked about in the last few slides into numbers, our budget for FY 2025 would go up about a $5 million increase. About 51% of our budget is still in salaries, and about 40% of our budget is in other operating expenses. Drilling down into the operating expenses a little further, here you'll still see, again, going back to focusing on the things we talked about in previous slides. About $30 million of our budget next year is dealing with maintenance of vehicles and facilities and aging infrastructure, and about $20 million is devoted to all things safety and security. And last but not least, even though it has to be the first thing that we pay every year, our debt service expenses, what we thought it might be good to do is just kind of show the full extent of our debt service payments for the next years. For FY '25, it'd be just over $18 million, and that'd be funded by a combination of local dollars and grant monies.
So if we didn't take on any more debt, we would be finished with all of our debt in 2023.
Correct.
Just wrapping up, cover just the calendar from here forward. Of course, we have the meeting today. In March, we will have a very similar meeting that's devoted to the capital budget. During that time, we'll also talk about where we are with the revenues and expenditures, both on the capital and the operating side. So we'll come back and revisit and give a brief update of where we are with the operating budget as well. Then in April, we're projecting to come to the MTC and ask for adoption of the budget, and so that we can submit it to City Council for their review, consideration, and adoption as well.
One more.
Any questions?
Okay. We will jump right in. We'll try to move quickly, but we're happy to answer any questions. Jason Lawrence, and I apologize if I refer to him as JL, I apologize to Jason, but if you hear me, it's a habit, and if I say JL, I mean Mr. Lawrence. Okay, so we know that there has been interest, demand to see what I'm going to call the revenue versus the cost analysis. That's a requirement of the interlocal agreement. So we are prepared to do that today at the end of this presentation. As we get there, though, I asked Mr. Lawrence to walk through the MTC's travel market policy, which is MTC 5, which really is our guidance from the MTC on what routes we prioritize, where we run routes, and where we don't. So, Mr. Lawrence, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Cagle. And good afternoon. I'm glad to do this presentation because going through this, I've been at CATS for almost 24 years. I remember sitting in a room with our first CEO developing these policies and bringing them in front of our board for adoption. And it was, looking at these again with almost fresh eyes, looking at how we have set priorities over the years and how it lines up with our services. And you'll see through a series of maps how it lines up with our geographies. And what was just handed out to you, and we'll reference this towards the end of the presentation, are service profiles for each of your jurisdictions, number of routes, frequencies, riderships, performance, passengers per hour, upcoming near-term initiatives and service upgrades, as well as future initiatives as well. So I thought it would be helpful before we go into the policy, share again the slide that we shared with you in October that talked about who we serve. Who is our riding public? Who is on our buses and our trains and our paratransit vehicles each and every day? The numbers in front of you, the bullets detailed, are from a 2022 origin destination survey that we did that looked at where people were coming from and where they were going and their type of travel that they were doing, and some demographic information there. And you can see that more than 70% of our customers are people of color. 60% earn less than $60,000 per year, and 40% of that 60 earn less than 30. One thing that you'll also notice in the bullets that the vast majority of the people who use our system are employed, and they're going to jobs, they're going to hospitals, they're going to grocery stores and other key needs throughout the day. Over 50 are going to work or school. And compared to prior surveys, so the last time we did an origin destination survey was 2013. We did one before the Blue Line extension started construction, and we did one after the Blue Line opened. We had to delay it somewhat due to the pandemic, so that's when we did it in 2022 versus right after the Blue Line opened extension in 2018. And what we did see is that the current survey, the new survey, we had a higher share or an increasing share of our riders that had no vehicles. So that percentage of our ridership went up, and that may be reflective of what was going on during the pandemic. Think about the return to work and how people were coming to work less frequently, at least in person. And so that may be showing up in the data, but that is certainly what we have seen is that we have a larger share of those without individual vehicles. We also do continuous surveys, and we recently did a customer survey where we asked about more service quality issues, and we did hear in that survey that there was a greater desire and need and request for more bus stop improvements and reliability. We didn't hear as much from frequency. It was really about reliability, making sure the bus was on time, that it was there when it said it needed to be. The two maps you see in front of you are almost companion documents that work together. Originally, the 2025 Transit and Land Use Plan in 1998 had a 5-quarter rapid transit system, but also had a series of bus improvements, bus frequency improvements, transit hubs, and the like throughout the entire Mecklenburg County area. Over the years, we obviously have updated that plan to what you see today with a mostly rail-based system, and we've put out a separate but combined map that works with the rail network called Envision My Ride System Plan that sets forth the vision for bus service, mobility hubs, and microtransit. And we put that in front of this board in May of '22 for adoption. That was comprehensive in nature. We started it around 2016, and by 2022, we had come together with a map, working with the community, working with each of your staff to develop what we see as a key visionary piece of how we want to roll out service over the next coming years. It also informed updates to our service-related policies that I'll go into today. It was adopted on May 25th of 2022, and we've talked about Envision My Ride for ever since, since I've been here for many years, since 2016. And so as we're also undergoing a new update to this plan, and we're focusing on how do we take this document, update it to where we are with travel markets, with ridership, how people are working and moving through the system today, and calling it a better bus effort. And we'll be bringing that back to this board for adoption to tweak this plan, adapt it to how we see people are moving today. The two policies that the Envision My Ride effort that was adopted in May of 2022 informed were the MTC 05 travel market policy that Mr. Cagle mentioned. It also helped inform the MTC 06 transit service guidelines. We brought both of these to this body in July of last year for updates for the service guidelines, which won't go into detail today. The main update to that document was focused around service performance and bus stop improvements and ways to develop a more focused capital plan around our bus stops, and we can go to that at later presentations. Today, we'll be focusing on the travel markets discussion. And the travel markets, sorry about that, provides policy guidance on service priorities to attract and develop transit competitive travel markets. It's a recognition that transit can't serve every single trip throughout the course of a day, throughout any system. There's people are moving throughout Mecklenburg County, throughout any region of any size. We can't serve every single trip, but there are certain trips that we can be most competitive for. And the travel market policy helps provide guidance to how we best serve those trips and prioritize those trips. It does define two travel markets, primary and secondary, and it was updated and adopted by this body on July 26, 2023, with recommendations coming out of the Envision My Ride update. I took from that policy and put on this slide the actual language that's in the service policy. And what it lays forward are markets that must be well served to achieve the goals of the land use plans and growth, and to achieve the goals of the 2025 Transit and Land Use Plan as amended and updated by the MTC. Listed before you are the primary markets for CATS listed in priority order. Today, there's 7 markets here. We're going to focus on the first 3 and show some maps that go into details with that. But number 1 in the priority travel markets is travel by those individuals who do not have access to or cannot utilize private transportation and require public transit for mobility. And so think of households, either low income, households in poverty, but primarily those that don't have a vehicle or are unable to drive. And we have some maps to detail that. Also important, number 2, travel by existing customers from existing service areas. And so what that means in part is people who are riding the bus today, riding the train today, that as we are looking at making service improvements or adjustments, that we are keeping in mind those who are using the service today, that we're not making their trip worse. And then finally, travel to and from within the 5 original corridors and major employment and activity centers and the connections between them. That goes back to the language from the original 2025 Transit and Land Use Plan, the 5 original rapid transit corridors, north, northeast, southeast, west, and south. And also key activity centers, think of Uptown Charlotte, places like South Park, Carolina Place Mall, activity centers where there is a collection of jobs and employment and housing that need to be served. We also added in the update in July the travel in adopted high-frequency corridors. That was not in the original travel market policy, and we added that to reflect the adoption of this body, the Envision My Ride plan, where we have up to 20 high-frequency corridors throughout Mecklenburg County. And you can see there as we go through the map, go through the list, that there's other activity centers and transit-oriented developments outside the regional 5 corridors. Congested travel corridors are also a primary travel market, and commuter travel to and from surrounding counties into the original 5 corridors. So think the Rock Hill Express, the 85X that goes out to Gaston County, the 74X that goes out to Union County are considered primary markets as well. So before I go to the next slide, any questions about these priority markets on the list?
I know that you probably said this, but we did this in July of 2023, so it's less than a year. But and when we did the study, how often did we assess employment centers? Or how do we assess them? So I think about the hospitals that are being built around, not only in Charlotte, but around the entire region. And that tends to be high destinations for employment just because of the workforce they have. So how do we deal with those kinds of things?
Absolutely, great question, Mayor. So I would maybe use the example of maybe Ballantyne is a good example. As you look, 20 years ago, that was just forest and farmland. And over the years, that has developed into a major employment center, and it's going to continue to be. And so through the update of the system plan in 2019, and through this work with the Envision My Ride, we added routes and frequencies for those future employment centers. And I think what's unique about CATS is that, being embedded within the city and working really closely with the staff of each of the towns, land use is core to what we do each and every day. So many of our planners come from a land use background. We work really closely with Kellerstein on the development side to look at rezonings, to look at land development. So we're actively engaged with ensuring that transit's not only considered at the beginning of these projects, but also that we're including them in our plans.
So let me see if I can say this back to you. That I'm working with the planners in most of the towns. When you see a major corporation engaging and hiring, that we are flexible. It doesn't take till the next study. It can be done as tested and accomplished.
Right, that's
Okay.
exactly
Thank you.
right.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I think that's really important, and I'm really happy to hear that. It's so important. Does it need to be reflected in the policy or rise in the ranking? Is this a matter of prioritization? It is in prioritization.
Yeah.
Will it be?
Absolutely, Ms. Chair. As you look at, number 1, 2, and 3, I would say jobs are embedded within each of these. They're kind of core to that, and making sure that we're serving as activity centers. Existing customers would come from, activity centers, and we specifically call it out on priority level 3.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Commissioner, I think that one of the things is that these are the high level. I think one of the things that we have to think about is how do we actually see implementation by the staff? So I'm sure the staff has roles and policies, and how do we do the collaboration when this is happening? I think that that's an important part of it. And I don't know, I guess this is led by your area, Jason. I think we also have to remember that these things are happening so quickly, and how do we make sure that we do? So it would probably be good at some point to have an example, or, like this is the number of times we had to go out, and here's who qualifies, because it doesn't just happen. And if it doesn't happen, then why? So that people will understand that it was a request but didn't make it to the list. And I think keeping that openness is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hey, Mr. Lawrence, using an example, so some of the changes we made that the MTC approved a month ago, again, one of those changes was reflective of changing priorities or this market and some of the changes that had happened in those areas. And so we brought forward those changes, made the recommendation, and now have implemented it. But as an example, the route where
It was the route to 235, I think it was the Route 56 Archdale route, where we made service on Sunday that did not previously exist.
Right, and that Sunday service really was, there was a location that has a high number of transit-dependent customers, who moved into that area and along that route, and they're a 7-day-a-week. They're a 7-day-a-week operation. It's an assistance center for folks, and they serve their clientele 7 days a week. And so we saw that need. We saw, number one, the increase in when we did run that route, and we saw the need. And so again, we looked at it with primary travel markets and these directives, priorities in mind. And so that's how the MTC sees the result of that. As staff hears these things, or we see these things, we make recommendations about the network, and they come to the MTC for consideration and possible approval.
It's a great point. I mean, the route changes that you just discussed, the Route 235, we had to make some adjustments to that route. We had an underperforming section. We had heard a need for more Sunday service to places like the Walmart that's off of Wilkinson Boulevard, better service to the Valley Woodard Center. And we made those adjustments to an underperforming section, folded that back into the route. And now on that route on Sunday, we carry 50 additional passengers that did not have service before. So that's a key, I think, feedback loop that would be very beneficial to share with the board. So as we go through the travel market policy, we mentioned there were two. There was a primary and then a secondary travel market. Secondary travel markets defined in the travel policy are secondary priority markets that will only be served when it is cost effective to do so and will not detract from CAT's ability to serve its primary markets. And some examples of those are trips from non-transit-oriented developments in areas regardless of location. So areas that are not TODs or are outside of the original 5 corridors. Local trips totally outside of Mecklenburg County, so that would be trips that occur outside the county. And then inter-county trips outside the original 5 corridors. Over the years, we have had express routes regionally, outside the original 5 corridors. We did have an express route to Lincoln County. We've had express routes to other corridors in York County as well. But the purpose of this piece is just to demonstrate that in order to serve these markets, we need to make sure that we're getting the priority markets served first and foremost.
Can I ask a question? I have a question about, excuse me. So we talk about transit-oriented development around the rail line most frequently. Are they all around the rail line, or is there such thing as a TOD that's sort of, I don't know, bus-oriented?
Sure. I mean, I think we have a number of high-frequency corridors that I think benefit economically from bus service. I mean, the Route 9 Central Avenue has, very high frequency. I also think the anticipation of those future service or future capital projects can entice development. There are TODs that are going up along Wilkinson Boulevard that were asked for TOD zoning, and along the southeast corridor as well. So I think it's certainly opportunities for bus space. We don't have like a full bus rapid transit system here, but I do think transit overall entices economic development.
Thank you.
So now that we've discussed those primary and secondary markets, we thought it would be helpful to walk you through what does that mean if we look at this, from a high level, look at maps and see where some of these populations are and see like how our services are lining up with those markets. So we looked at car-free households, so zero-car households, poverty. We mapped the origin and destination by zip code, the survey that I talked about in the earlier part of the presentation. And then where are the jobs? Where are the places people are trying to get to each and every day? So one of the primary markets, zero vehicle households, and I've put up here the language from the travel market policy to have that as a reference. And what basically, when you look at this map, just simply put, just the darker the color is, the higher concentration of those households. The lighter the color, the less of those households that exist. And you can see in this, often has been discussed and called the crescent. We use language, it's called corridors of opportunity here in the city of Charlotte at times to talk about corridors where there is certainly need. And the greatest concentration of those zero vehicle households are west and east of uptown Charlotte. And we do see some pockets along South Boulevard, Independence Boulevard, and the University City area. Local bus routes, the most flexible service we have, does provide the greatest service to those households. And then in the northern communities, the Village Rider does help serve some of those pockets as well. But we do think, as we look at throughout this, there are, not to say there's not zero in some of the other lighter places, but we do think microtransit does provide a key strategy for serving some of the more low density in areas of need throughout the county.
Are these online somewhere where they're interactive or GIS based? These maps, I'm sorry, not all of them.
Oh, yeah. This is one of our service planning tools, and there's some really great, excellent online tools that we could share that details this. This is from detail from the American Community Survey from the Census Bureau from 2022.
Okay.
Another indicator of a primary market, households in poverty. Another map that is very similar to the zero-car households that show this concentrations also west and east of Uptown Charlotte with pockets along South Boulevard, Independence, and University City area. And where we see from a strict number standpoint, and you can see that on service policies that we passed, the service profiles that we passed out, that some of the highest ridership routes are also along those geographies, for zero-car households as well as households in poverty, like Route 9 along Central Albemarle and also Central and Albemarle Road, Route 7, Betty's Ford Road, and Route 16 and Route 27 that goes from Uptown Charlotte all the way to the town of Matthews. And before I go to the next primary market, I think it's important to note, here, our region, what was detailed in the Chetty study that talked about an individual's ability to escape poverty and move up socioeconomic status, travel time was seen as the single greatest indicator of their ability to move up. And so transit and local service and bus service particularly has that greatest leverage to improve a person's quality of life. So number 2 on the primary market list was travel by existing customers from existing service areas. I mentioned that survey on the first slide of this presentation that detailed who was riding our services. What you see here is a mapping of zip codes with the pink color being the highest concentration, the purple being less, and then the lighter purple being kind of lower on the scale, and the green, individuals outside the county that are using our services. And ridership is highest along routes identified as corridors of opportunity here in Charlotte, Central, Albemarle, Betty's Ford Road, and West Boulevard. And we do see some high pockets of ridership, again, along South Tryon, Monroe, and John Street. But also, as we look at existing customers, it's not just local, it's not just the Blue Line, but it's also our express markets. And we see strong ridership from many of our express corridors, primarily along the I-77 corridor and the Independence corridor, some of our higher performing express routes that we've had for many decades. And lastly, one of the number 3 list on our travel policy for primary markets is our travel to and from within one of the original 5 corridors and major employment and activity centers and the connections between them. And so local service, once again, bus is our most flexible service, not only serves Uptown Charlotte, but other strong activity centers like University Research Park, South Park Airport, and the Westinghouse area. It's a very kind of large geography, but it has a lot of employment in that space, and we serve that through the Blue Line, through feeder services that connect to our Blue Line stations. Express service historically has been focused on serving Uptown Charlotte, people coming in for commute, but we also see opportunities for commute going out from Uptown to areas like Lowe's, Ballantyne Campus, and the River District. As those areas grow over time, there could be opportunities for serving those as a part of our primary markets. And I'll just kind of close this whole priority discussion with, the original 5 corridors do serve as a framework for our future economic growth and ridership at existing and future transit stations. I think as we look at the Blue Line, we've been talking a lot about bus here, but as we look at, Blue Line as a service and what we've seen in the explosive growth in South End, it's moving up to the NODA and to the university area. It does serve as a framework for future ridership, but also for existing economic development. So at the beginning of this presentation, we put a series of handouts for each of you that shows by jurisdiction, each of routes within your area, ridership, average weekday ridership, passengers per hour, near-term service improvements as well as future improvements. There's a map on there that is part of that adopted map from May of 2022. And how we developed that was we mapped those existing and future services and detailed those service levels for your review today. And then at this point, unless there's any questions for me for those service profiles, I'll hand over to Chad to talk about the sales tax revenue and cost analysis that's also included in this presentation.
JL and Chad, I think in the interest of time, let me check with Commissioner Altman. Would you like to proceed? Or
So
like to?
what do you recommend in terms of trying to keep us on schedule and make sure that members can get some food? Is there a meal in there?
Yeah. It's
It's setting
setting
up right
up,
now.
so might I suggest, the MTC meetings is scheduled to start at 5:30. If the MTC is okay with it, I think we could probably work our way in the next 15 minutes through the last couple slides, the spreadsheet, pause for dinner, and then come back for MTC.
Yeah, and
for the
we
regular
can
meeting?
try to start right at 5:30 if people are still eating at their space. That way we'll try to adjourn on time. So
Sure.
does that work for everyone? Okay.
So let me, I'm going to steal your thunder, Chad, and in the interest of time, I think I'm going to roll through these next couple slides. The sales tax revenue cost analysis, I don't know what to call it. It doesn't have a name. This represents the first time in 24 years that it's been done. So this is the analysis that's governed by the interlocal agreement, and I believe it's also codified in the MTC financial policies. A couple things to remember about this. The general statute, Article 43 general statute, designates how to allocate revenues to create what it calls it as theoretical revenues. And it's a set allocation, and we'll talk more about that. But those revenues, that theoretical revenues, does not represent the location where the revenues were collected, where the sales taxes were collected. We don't know that. The state does not provide us point of sale data. So we do not know where the revenues were derived, so to speak. The other thing it doesn't account for is it takes total revenues, and we know that by some estimates, at least 30%, at least some of the revenues are derived from residents who do not live in Mecklenburg County. They're visiting. So they come in to shop, or they come in for a convention. So really, theoretical revenues is just a prescribed method of taking the revenues received, which the state provides us, and allocating it to the different jurisdictions on a monthly or annual basis. The other thing about theoretical revenues is the way that the state designates it or prescribes it, it has the effect of doubling the population of Mecklenburg County because it counts Mecklenburg County as one entity with total population, and then it counts every separate jurisdiction again with their independent population. So when you look at it, if you're not familiar with this, it looks a little bit strange. Trust me, it's how the statute, I learned the hard way when I looked at it and said, this isn't right, and then I realized it was what the statute says. But it has the effect of doubling population because of how it specifies. The other thing I'll say as we jump into the spreadsheet, the cost, it acknowledges our annual operating cost plus debt service, which again is an operating cost, but it also doesn't take into account the value of transit, things like traffic mitigation, air quality, or the economic impact, i.e. increased sales tax and property tax revenues to the various jurisdictions, the county, the city, the towns, and how those additional tax revenues are distributed across. So with that, we'll jump to the very next slide. As I said, the sales tax revenue cost analysis, the top half are the revenues, and that was pretty easy because it's prescriptive. The state told us how to do it. So population, again, total population, and then in effect, it doubles because of the towns. The percent is just that, the percent of total of 2.217 million theoretical population. The only thing that we did here, we took a little bit of liberty for this, is as we start thinking about the services we provide, all those services, the cost of all those services are in the bottom half, and there are 3 jurisdictions that pay for maintenance of effort. So the maintenance of effort payments were added back in to the jurisdictions that pay that. So that's where the MOE line comes from. County pays $192,942, Huntersville $18,566, and so on. That adds those back so that you get a true apples to apples when we compare it to the cost of services provided. So let's talk about the services on the cost side. Debt service, the interlocal agreement requires that all jurisdictions that are participating assist with paying debt service. So that's the top line. Debt service gets paid first. We allocated it the same as the revenues on a population basis. Transfers to reserve, again, we have financial safeguards to protect CAT's operation and the city's investment carrying that debt. So again, it's allocated on population. Here's where, I'm not saying it's right, it's just I didn't have a blueprint. We had to think about how do we allocate rail versus bus? And what do we do with Mecklenburg County's allocated 84 million, since technically 100% of the costs of services occur in Mecklenburg County? We sort of have a revenue and cost allocation issue here. And so what we chose to do was, as we viewed it, rail was a countywide benefit. We assigned all of rail to the county column. The other result that provides is it provides an apples to apples comparison for the towns. Bus. It provides all of the towns, where there's Charlotte, Mint Hill, Matthews, Pineville. It provides an apples to apples comparison on the bus side of the service. So that's why that is. That's why 73 million is attributed rail and streetcar on the county side, and bus is not. We were looking at bus as, again, all of our bus service occurs in the county, so it also occurs there too, but we tried to break it down to the local jurisdictions. So when we get into local and express routes, we assign the local routes based on jurisdictional miles. The express routes we assigned based on where those express routes were serving, i.e. if an express route has one stop in Mint Hill and a stop in Charlotte, it was split. If it has one stop and then serves downtown Charlotte. If it has one stop and only one stop in Huntersville, it was assigned to Huntersville, and so on. And we can provide, in your service profiles, show you a breakdown of those express routes. Paratransit, we assign those costs based on the known customers, the people who have signed up and used paratransit. We assign those costs based on their home address. So as a percentage of total. I believe there are about 4,000 registered paratransit users. We know where they live because they sign up and give us their home address, so we use their home address as the allocation. Vanpool was population-based. It is a small program and a small cost, but we did that on a populations basis. And then the only other oddity is the city pays back to the county $483,402, and those are costs associated, we believe, with County Human Services Transit Provision. I believe it's the MTS program. So again, that was assigned to the county because it's paid from the city back to the county for that specific service. That brings you down to the total line. And then in this instance, On the findings by jurisdiction, a negative number indicates that the cost of services provided exceeds the revenues allocated, the theoretical revenues allocated to the jurisdiction. So the results speak for themselves. Mint Hill is the lone jurisdiction that is not a negative number. It is on the positive side. Looking at the why on that, it's predominantly because Mint Hill has service in the form of express, but does not have local service in Mint Hill. So again, that was a quick way to go through it, but I would pause there for thoughts, questions, comments.
Can you tell me where up there that the STS services fall?
Paratransit, I apologize. That's bus paratransit.
We are unable to get STS services in Mint Hill, so I wonder why we would accept part of the cost on that.
So there are Mint Hill residents who use paratransit and are signed up to use it. They cannot have paratransit come to their house, but normally what they will do is meet paratransit at the closest available stop that is in the zone. And that's true in other areas as well. There are paratransit residents who live outside of the designated service areas. And what they do is they sign up, they're still eligible, and they can still use the service. They just have to meet the bus at a designated location, maybe a grocery store, or it may be some other location, public location.
Okay, then that ties in with my other one. What exactly is the description of a park and ride? Because if they're meeting them at the grocery store, I see we have listed a park and ride, which is truthfully a old Harris Teeter parking lot that is now a Ace Hardware store that has one sign in a grass strip. That's considered a park and ride?
Yeah, we have different types of park and rides. We have park and rides at Blue Line stations. We have park and rides that we've built for bus services. And we also have agreements at places like grocery stores or churches or schools where we lease or rent spaces at those locations for express service use.
Okay, thank you.
But to note, whatever the cost of the park and ride is, if we're paying rent on spots, it would be reflective in the cost of service. If it's a capital expense, it's not reflected in the service, it would be reflected in the debt service line. Does that, and that sounds
Which we're
funny.
also sharing equally, even though we don't incur those costs, correct?
Well, that is designated in the interlocal that all voting members will share equally in the debt service.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and so, but a capital expense, so buying land for a park and ride, would not be reflected in the bus local express. It would be reflected in the debt service or PAYGO capital lines. That would be a capital expense, not an operating.
I'll save the rest of my questions in the essence of time, because we could be here all night. Thank you.
I do have one question, and I will admittedly say that Brian Welch is certainly the expert on this more than I am, but my understanding is that the sales tax revenue is for expansion of service, not continuation of existing service.
That is correct.
So are all of the bus routes listed expanded services since the sales tax was implemented, or?
Yeah. So that is the
Bus
incorrect way to look at
Or are
it.
they bus routes that existed prior to the implementation of the sales tax rate?
Yeah, so whether or not it's right or wrong, and I'm not saying it's incorrect, but Brian has talked to me about this, that is not the way so MOE represents the supplement versus supplant, and it was never interpreted to mean that any route that existed must continue to exist and should not count against it. What it means is any entity who had transit before the tax must pay in the amount that transit cost after the tax, and that's reflected in MOE. So what that tells me is Before 1998, Huntersville had some amount of transit, and the cost of that was $18,566. The county had some transit service, and the cost of that was $192,942. And the city had some transit services that cost $31 million in today's dollars. It's never been interpreted or looked at as any route that existed, because routes do change over time. So the Central Avenue route probably existed more before 1998. Was it exactly the same or on the same frequencies as it is today? Probably not. And so MOE is referring to jurisdictions that provided their own transit or had some amount of transit service. And that has been paid since 1998 by the 3 jurisdictions that were acknowledged to have transit services pre-1998 or pre-sales tax.
And sure, and I wasn't suggesting that the routes need to stay the same so much as trying to understand what has been expanded upon since the implementation of the sales tax revenue.
So
Related
we
to
don't
less
track
routes.
how the routes change over multiple years, and the costs represent all of the service. Does that make sense?
So does this include the costs to run a route, but also capital improvements like putting a bench, putting a shelter? Is it everything
No.
combined?
This is the annual operating cost. Capital costs would be reflected in this in the form of debt service. What it doesn't try to do is create amortization schedules for all capital assets across the system. As we understood it, this should be really an evaluation of operating, the cost to operate the system and the value or the cost per jurisdiction, not the value, but the cost per jurisdiction. And so you have debt service, which does go towards capital assets, but it does not try to create amortization schedules by jurisdiction for all assets.
Well, so I'm, trying to understand, because you certainly do hear the narrative that, X town is putting in more in revenue than it's getting back in investment and services. So I am looking to find a document or compilation of documents that will fully show the picture of, how much was invested in Davidson or Cornelius or Huntersville in a year, if you add the cost of the bus service that went there, plus any infrastructure that was put there, which I don't know requires debt service, because you're probably not borrowing against the bond to make a shelter. Maybe you are, I don't know.
It depends, but so that is a much more complicated process that we will need significant amounts of time to do. The other thing I would say, I would caution against that is there may be, so let's actually use a real world example, Hambright Park and Ride. That is clearly an asset that benefits Huntersville, but also the northern part of the county. The cost of that asset is zero because it was donated by NCDOT. So we don't get to, when we're talking about cost, whether it's of assets or the service, you don't get to the actual value of the service provided. Another example would be, we may have park and rides that we have owned for a great amount of time, and they're fully amortized. So they have no cost from an accounting standpoint, but they certainly have value from a service provision standpoint. So in the interest of trying to provide this and having no blueprint, we tried to simplify it to show the value of the services provided on an annual basis without trying to create amortization schedules and talk about value of an asset versus cost or amortized value of an asset. And that is what we were attempting to do. again, I didn't have a blueprint. It's never been done, so we gave it our best shot. What I would say is a couple thoughts on this. I have talked to former CAT CEOs, not the most recent former CEO, but other former CEOs. And I asked them, why wasn't it ever done? I mean, it's in the interlocal. The thinking was that this should really be, why it wasn't done, I don't know. The thinking was, so again, when we start talking about service, we talked about MTC 05, and MTC 05 does not designate this cost versus revenue at all as any of the priorities for how we designate service. So we have a little bit of mismatch between that, but what I think is, based on other information from other directors, is it was really intended to be used as a way for us to evaluate where we need to think about increasing services over time. And clearly, using this, Mint Hill is one of those places. Not the only place, but clearly Mint Hill is. And so what I would use this tool for would be to say, look, as we think about microtransit, and we think microtransit would be beneficial to Mint Hill, what is our rollout plan beyond northern towns for Mint Hill and the southern area of the county? Because it's safe to say that any of the towns would benefit from microtransit, but what I would use this to look at is how do we increase service in Mint Hill. Now, I'll also say over time, the service in Mint Hill, for example, has changed. In 2013, there was local service in Mint Hill. It was cut a few years later for lack of ridership. The route had approximately 7 riders a day at the time. So that came before the MTC, and it was removed from service because of lack of demand. But this was our best attempt. These are all allocations. Our allocations aren't right. They just seem to be reasonable, and so that's where this is our first shot at it.
Mayor Lyles.
As I think about this and all of the history that we have for it, I understand how you had to sort and figure out some way of addressing it. I think the questions of how do you use it is really the most significant part if we're going to do this kind of effort, because I'm not quite sure how any one of these metrics could just flip whatever. And I think the real question that we have is, do we want to try to do something differently around how do we do service? Or do we use this as a planning tool around to question some of the criteria that we have for what we are trying to accomplish? And if you look at the long term of trying to move people, if we take this right now and just use it, it would almost be like, well, this is how we're spending under the policies that we have for people that don't have cars, people that are going to work, or are we trying to address it in a way for the future? And I think it would be good if we took some time to actually dig down deeper into this and what's included and how it should be included, as well as how do we have something that we all can understand and work with. And so I don't know how to do that. I think sometimes small groups are good to work with, because then you have a chance to say, here's to question it. But I also believe that if there's to be changes to this, where does it take us? Does it take us forward, or are we talking about service or something else? So it's just, I think, important that we have a policy that's in place that generates this information. Am I saying that right, Mr. Cagle?
The interlocal requires it, so there's not a policy, there is the interlocal. depending on how the MTC would like it used, we would then need to discuss, does there need to be a policy amendment to incorporate it into the policy, into MTC 05?
So I think that, I'm not sure how we do this today. It's been a long day already for all of us, I believe. But could we have this put on the agenda for, or at least give us the opportunity to think about it a little bit more than just the presentation that we have up here today?
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I would say, and I appreciate the comments in the debate, this is provided in the current iteration of the interlocal agreement, so it needs to be something we continue to do. And if policies need to be updated to conform with what the interlocal requires, then it does, and that's what needs to happen. You know, I understand the complexity around amortization of infrastructure, and I don't want to send you down very complicated, you know, schedules to try to figure that out, but I do think we need to have some form of understanding on at least an annual basis what is being spent in infrastructure in each town and city and in the ETJ, because I've certainly heard mayors say, you know, we've had nothing but a stick or a, you know, just very bare bones type of structures. And so I think we all need to have a greater insight into the infrastructure that's being constructed in each of our participants, you know, on some sort of regular cadence, more frequently than annually. And if we could bring that forward when it is feasible for you, that would be great.
Yeah, so
initially.
I apologize. We can provide you a list of infrastructure that's in all of your jurisdictions, and we can provide you a list of future infrastructure that will be in your jurisdictions. And absolutely, we can and will do that. It is much more complicated, though, than to take the cost of that infrastructure and create a cost allocation model like this. It's not impossible. Certainly not impossible, but it is a much more complicated endeavor in cost allocation or cost accounting, and we would need time to do that. We would absolutely need time to do that, and we would probably need to bring in some accounting assistance to be able to do that in any kind of timely way. But if the question is, can we get a list of infrastructure in the jurisdiction and planned for each jurisdiction? Absolutely.
Thank you, and the dollar figure associated with it. I think that this is a tremendous step towards transparency, which builds confidence and builds, you know, us in the right direction. So thank you for this work. Why don't we, unless someone has a burning question, just take a 10-minute break to go and make yourself a plate, and then we can come back and start our regular business meeting at...
I want to know, what
Yes.
did we decide to do? It's the, what are you saying?
Well, what...
Deciding to do, and is this
Sure.
something that,
So what I would like is for Mr. Cagle to come, you know, I think we probably all need to study this and have some dialogue, and let us, you know, I'm happy to take any feedback from you or anybody about when to put it next back on the agenda. I need some time to look at it. I'm not prepared right now to say what I think our next step should be, if that works for
that's
others.
what, when I heard it, I agree with you. I don't think that we have that.
If I might add, I want to hand to Mr. Cagle a copy of the interlocal that we've got a piece highlighted that we seem to be in disagreement over. I believe the lady from Matthews mentioned that the town of Mint Hill disagrees with the way they interpret the interlocal as far as how that's supposed to be done. So maybe he'll give his legal an opportunity to look at this too and see if we're misinterpreting in our end of it as well.
Thank you for that request. Can you ask the legal department to address that directly?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Then if it gives us, let's say 5:35, if we can be back in our places to start our regular meeting, and thank you.
Thank you.